Hello ladies and gentlemen, Top Hat Gaming Man here, the most handsome hardware specialist on the information superhighway. In terms of game consoles, they do not really get any more iconic and impactful on popular culture than that of the Sega Megadrive, the 16-bit Sega console that ignited the most passionate console war in planet Earth's history. The recent release and popularity of the Sega Megadrive Mini pays testament to this statement. The beloved system shifted over 13 million units and swung the console wars in Sega's favour for a substantial amount of time. As a result, the Sega Megadrive outsold the Super Nintendo in Europe, South America and Australia, conquering consoles on 3 continents. Even in North America, the platform managed to knock the NES off its pedestal and as a result put up a decent fight against the Super Nintendo on those shores too. Despite this though, a failure in one highly important market crushed the Mega Drive's chances of becoming the world's #1 selling console that generation. The market I speak of is of course Japan, the epicenter of console gaming throughout that period. So today we are going to look at the contributing factors that led to such consumer behaviour. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of why the Sega Mega Drive failed in Japan. Yeah! The date is October the 29th, 1988, the day the Sega Mega Drive would see a launch in Japan. The console technology was heavily based on the Sega System 16 arcade board and centred around a Motorola 68000 processor. On the platform's day of launch, the system was in all technicalities the most powerful games console the world had ever seen. The platform would precede Sega's 8-bit range of consoles that had all failed to grab a significant console gaming market share for Sega in the region. The market leaders in the country at the time were obviously Nintendo with their Famicom platform, the system that would be reshelled and branded as the NES around most parts of the planet. Elsewhere in the world, as we know, this console dominated over in North America, but the flashiness of the Mega Drive's appeal was not enough for Sega to dethrone Nintendo in Japan. So what went wrong for Sega in that country to simply stop them achieving the same feat at home? Well, there are arguably a number of factors that would prevent the Mega Drive from carving out a respectable niche for itself in the land of the rising sun. So let's together talk some of these through. The first factor worth discussing is the system's launch itself. The maiden voyage of the Mega Drive in Japan was quite different from the rest of the world. Obviously, as the platform was launched in each country, there would be a bigger library of more and more games behind it. In fact, over 900 in total throughout the system's life cycle. On day 1 though, the platform would launch with no more than a measly 4 games, with these being Space Harrier 2, Altered Beast, Osumatsu-kun and Super Thunder Blade. And for the platform's first 6 months of its existence, it had practically no games released. Even by January the 1st of 1990, which was 15 months after the console's launch, the console only had a total of 23 different games for it released in Japan. Early support for the system was just not what it quite should have been, especially when it came to support from third-party developers. This was partially down to the fact that Nintendo was still in the phases of locking developers into aggressive exclusivity deals for their games. Capcom, Konami, Square and Enix, all massive Japanese development houses, all had strong ties to Nintendo, and as a result, in many instances, their hands were tied when it came to developing games for the Mega Drive. As we know, eventually Konami and Capcom would start pumping out Mega Drive games, but in Japan's case, it was all a little too late, because by that point, consumers had mostly opted for the Super Nintendo. Examples of these shenanigans apply to the contracts Nintendo negotiated with these companies to gain the console rights to Street Fighter II and Turtles in Time on their system. Part of the deal was that these franchises would need to remain Nintendo exclusives for the first 12 months of their console releases. In the Turtles case, the Mega Drive would get the stripped down Hyperstone Heist instead, and when the embargo ended on Street Fighter 2 and Champions Edition would see a release on the Mega Drive, the Big N would aggressively respond by trouncing it with Street Fighter 2 Turbo anyway. In terms of Square and Enix, neither company would ever publish any games for the Mega Drive, thus meaning that cultural phenomena in Japan such as Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy would continue to remain exclusives to Nintendo at the time. Fans of the genre who owned Mega Drives would have to settle with Phantasy Star, although looking at the sales figures for the system in the country, few people seem to make that choice. As much as Nintendo was a massive thorn in the side for Sega, they were not even the company's only significant competition in the region either. The Mega Drive's other big issue was NEC and their PC Engine range of systems. The PC Engine would arrive to the market in Japan an entire 12 months earlier than that of the Mega Drive, and in many ways you could argue a case for it being the system that kicked off the 16-bit wars. Despite only having an 8-bit CPU, the platform's 16-bit video color encoder and 16-bit video display controller equipped the system with 16-bit marketing bragging rights, meaning that if Japanese consumers wanted a console that was more powerful and offered more flashy graphics than that of the Famicom, then they had the option to do so an entire year before the Mega Drive even existed. Which, to be fair, is exactly what the Japanese chose to do, as the Mega Drive always trailed behind in third place in the Japanese console war. In some ways, in terms of what the PC Engine could actually do, it was more capable than the Mega Drive anyway. The PC Engine offered games with larger colour palettes, massive sprites, and arrived on the scene at an earlier date. The only chink in the platform's armour really was its ability to handle extra background layers in comparison to what the Mega Drive could do. But all in all, the games graphically look pretty similar. So far we have discussed third parties, the importance of the JRPG genre in Japan and the success of the PC Engine. However, there is one more element that I feel affected the success of the Mega Drive in both Japan and the rest of the world, perhaps more than anything else. And that element is of course culture. We have already talked about how the lack of JRPGs on the platform would have been unattractive to Japanese consumers. However, there are other gaming genres that would have played into the system's successes and failures. Let us take sports games for example. As much as I would gather the majority of my audience probably despise companies such as EA, it was the likes of them that contributed to the Mega Drive being such a smash hit in Europe and the Americas. To this day, many people still buy consoles specifically just to play sports games, and the abundance of which the Mega Drive offered made the device a tantalising choice for some Western consumers. If you wanted Madden, FIFA, PGA Golf, etc., the Mega Drive was probably the system for you. However, evolving a console around these sort of sports obviously isn't going to have the same impact in Japan. In fact, the whole way the Mega Drive was marketed and the library of games was all very appealing to Western audiences. However, with the cultural differences between the East and the West, I cannot believe the same sort of marketing campaign would probably have had the same appeal in Japan. In fact, I came across a rather amusing forum post when researching this topic that summarises these perceptions perfectly, which I thought would be fun to share with you. One user writes, "Basically the Mega Drive was for men. Men who like violence, grit, realism, speed, adrenaline and hard-hitting sports. The Mega Drive gave this in abundance. The SNES gave primary colours, childish soundtracks and cutesy-wootsy baby characters. So the Japanese lapped it up." A further user responded to this statement by writing, "The comment made about the Mega Drive being for real men is actually not far off base, but should probably be amended to read real American men. With an abundance of sports and fast action titles, the Genesis flourished here in the US, but was dead on arrival in Japan when it tried to compete with the PC Engine's larger library and generally more detailed and colourful graphics." Whilst these posts were clearly a little tongue-in-cheek, I agree that there is some truth to it. However, I do not agree with the part about the Mega Drive being aimed at men. From my memories, the system seemed to be aimed at young boys who wanted to try it really hard to be men. So the marketing was laced with a nice serving of hyper-masculinity to convince youngsters that the Mega Drive was the more grown-up console to own. But back on track again, I can completely see why the PC Engine and Nintendo products were more appealing to Japanese audiences. Apart from the head start, certain genres of games and art styles are just less prevalent on the Mega Drive. You want JRPGs? The Mega Drive is not for you. Do you want anime inspired games? Then you are better off with the PC Engine. In this same vein, you can see that the lack of sports games probably played into the TurboGrafx-16's lack of success in the West too. So culturally, some consoles are just more bespoke for certain markets than others. If you have been watching my channel for a while, you may be aware of that a similar scenario unfolded in Japan between the Sega Saturn and the Nintendo 64, where the two systems would perform in polar opposite positions to that of the West. So this phenomenon is not exclusive to the Mega Drive when it comes to consumer behaviour in Japan. In fact, apart from the Mega Drive and Nintendo 64, both flopping in Japan, the Xbox range of systems have arguably performed even worse over there, because once again the systems were all built around catering to a Western audience. All in all, I find these sales shifts an extremely interesting subject to look over and ponder about. Let me know in the comment section why you feel that the Mega Drive was less attractive to a Japanese audience. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts too. So ladies and gentlemen, that was a story of why the Sega Mega Drive failed in Japan. If you enjoyed today's video, please do not forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss one of my videos. Finally, to conclude this video on my channel, Top Hat Gaming Man is funded by the fantastic support I receive from my Patreon supporters, who really do help me out and relieve a lot of stress from my life. So thank you once again for encouraging me to make such content. So a huge shout out to Carl Johnson, JD Robbins, Seabass the Great, Sid Spaces, Andrew Bazanski, Edward O'Reilly, Quang DX, Sponge McB, Michael Baker, Computer Man, Antonio Rodriguez, and all of my other patrons. Thank you all so much.